Hello, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the break. For those of you who are just joining us for this session, then welcome. It's great to have you all here. Before we get started, I just wanted to make a couple of quick announcements. So first of all, today actually marks 7 years since the beginning of the brutal war on Yemen. And later on today, Stop the War is working with Liberation to host an online meeting to discuss the war, to discuss Britain's role in it as the largest weapons supplier to Saudi Arabia, and what we can do to continue to mobilise against the war in Yemen. So if you're available later on today, please do join that. I know some information was posted in the chat earlier, the link, joining link and information on the speakers, and perhaps it will be posted in the chat again now so you can get that information. Another announcement is a week today, 2nd of April, there is a People's Assembly Against Austerity protest about the cost of living crisis. And of course, these things are linked when we think about the amount of money that is spent on wars, the amount of money that is not spent on public services and the things people need to push back against this terrible cost of living crisis that people are experiencing. Of course, also the links to gas and oil. So that is taking place a week today on the 2nd of April, 2 p.m. outside Downing Street for those of you who are based in Britain and want to join that. Final plug is that if you are currently not a member of the Stop the War Coalition, we would urge you to join, to get involved, contact your local groups and help build the movement where you live as well. So you can join Stop the War Coalition on our website. Please do. Please sign up to our mailing list as well to hear about more of these online and in-person meetings and events and protests that we're organising in the coming weeks and months. So now moving on to our second session today, which is about more focusing on the consequences of this war. And our first speaker is the Executive Secretary of the Ukrainian Pacifist movement, a board member of World Beyond War and European Bureau for Conscientious Objection. And it's really great to be joined by Yuri. And I hope that you can hear me, Yuri, because I don't think I can see you on video, but I've just invited you to unmute. Yuri.
One moment.
That's okay. I can hear you, but not yet see you, Yuri.
Yes. Okay, I will.
Got you. Great to be joined by you, Yuri.
Hello. Dear friends, I would like to thank organizers for this informative event and to all speakers for your excellent commentaries and presentations. During the months of Russian cruel military intervention to Ukraine, the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights reports about 2,788 civilian casualties, including 1,081 killed. Figures that are likely much higher, and these tragic numbers will continue to rise as hostilities rage on. It includes 283 civilian casualties, 59 killed people in the non-government controlled areas of Donbass, in the non-recognized separatist republics. More than 10 million of people have been forcibly displaced, roughly a quarter of the Ukrainian population, with the number of people moving across international borders surpassing 3.7 million. 271,000 of refugees fled to Russia. So pro-Russian regions of Ukraine share near 10% of casualties and refugees. The destruction of critical health infrastructure and the destruction of medical supply chains pose a significant threat to the health and well-being of millions of people. Even where health facilities are functional, the danger of moving in areas experiencing ongoing fighting often pushes people to take the risk of foregoing medical care, leading to greater suffering and preventable death. Critical infrastructure and housing have been hard hit in Donbas and in other areas of intensive fighting. In Kyiv, capital of Ukraine, there is no light in the Svetoshinsky district. 2 lines have been cut off due to Russian shelling in the suburbs. I live in Kyiv. I hear these horrible sounds of air raid sirens and explosions every day, and I can't go abroad with family because of prohibition for all men in age from 18 to 60 to leave country. There is no legal recognition of conscientious objection to military service. Our government tries to turn whole population into soldiers, rejecting with contempt any notions of pacifism. Our army and the police publish in social network recepts of Molotov cocktails and call people to kill and burn Russians, which is unprecedented practice. You can hardly find any other police forces in the world urging people to make Molotov cocktails. Of course, this practice of prohibition for all men in age from 18 to 60 to leave country is denounced by human rights scholars and experts as contrary to international humanitarian law. And in recent report, Conscientious Objection to Military Service in Europe, 2021, issued by European Bureau for Conscientious Objection, this is denounced as well as calls of Ukrainian pacifists and Russian pacifists, Russian movement of conscientious objectors to refuse to bear arms, to refuse to kill, and to follow conscience. Any individual efforts to stop the war are valuable today. This is messages of Ukrainian pacifists and of Russian pacifists. This attempt to mobilize whole people to fight against the enemy is not a result of Russian invasion. President of Ukraine Zelensky introduced such policies during 2 years in office. He broke his election promises to negotiate peace with Russia. Instead of that, he initiated legislation about expansion of armed forces, mandatory military training of population, draconian punishments for evasion of conscription. He ruined all remaining relations with Russia, banned pro-Russian media, intensified prosecution of mainstream pro-Russian politicians, and of course refused to comply with Minsk agreements, which were internationally approved peace deal. Militarization of Ukraine and public hateful denouncement of any peaceful solutions is the most disturbing result of current conflict. This political technology of hating, blaming, and fighting to unite people around holy war, this crusader attitude is also employed in Russia and in the West. Russia had this cult of the great patriotic war for many years, and we in Ukraine had it too, in Soviet time and even in modern time. And now Russians are crusading against Ukrainian Nazi, as well as Ukraine crusading against Russian Nazi. And both sides think truth is on their side and victory will be theirs. And archaic political culture makes both sides think they are still living in time of World War II and they should destroy existential enemy or they will be destroyed. And because of that, peace talks between Ukraine and Russia are stuck. Both sides refuse to make any political concessions. Russia still demands non-alignment status of Ukraine, suppression of anti-Russian right-wingers, abolition of legislation discriminatory to Russians, recognition of Russian sovereignty over Crimea and independence of Donbas. Ukraine rejects all of this, but non-alignment, demands withdrawal of Russian forces from all Ukrainian territory in internationally recognized borders of Ukraine, including Crimea and Donbas, and reparations for Russian aggression. And there are, of course, these demands to punish Russian war criminals. Ukrainian civil society funded by the Western governments and private benefactors such as George Soros openly calls for escalation of war. I will give you one typical example. NGO Center for Civil Liberties, considered as leading Ukrainian human rights defending organization, many years never criticized Ukraine for human rights violations during military conflict with separatists in Russia, but always supported suppression of Russian culture and all pro-Russian civil society structures in Ukraine. And during last month, Center for Civil Liberties issued two statements calling the West to provide Ukraine more military aid, prioritize no-flying zone and weapon supply over humanitarian aid, and called do not ask Ukraine to make any concessions to Russia. This warmongering organization, acting under disguise of human rights defenders, is supported and financed by the United States Department of State, European Commission, Open Society Foundations, Sigrid Rosen Trust, National Endowment for Democracy, USAID, Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency, Helsinki Foundation, and even United Nations Development Program. There are a lot of civil society organizations and charities in Ukraine participating in worldwide Western big push for more NATO involvement into Ukrainian conflict, including for no-fly zones, and you should beware of them and avoid supporting their warmongering activities. In result of this big push, Putin already put his nuclear forces in high alert. And former President Medvedev, now deputy head of Russian Security Council, in yesterday's interview said that Russia may use nuclear weapons in 4 cases: in retaliatory strike for nuclear attack against Russia or allies, when Russian critical infrastructure is targeted, or in response to aggression against Russia or allies, threatening existence of the country. This formulation is very vague, but since Russia thinks of self-proclaimed Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics as the allies, and since Black Sea Fleet in Crimea is vital part of Russian military infrastructure, Ukrainian claim to that territories, so it is internationally recognized, in case of international enforcement, may trigger a Russian nuclear strike. So, what do we have now, and what fears we have today? It is Orwell-like permanent war, including these nuclear threats. It is a militarized world economy, rising far-right populism as mainstream politics. It is more military spending and, of course, declining social standards, including, of course, this great fear of food shortages in global south. But talking about these fears, let's also don't forget our great hopes. Because when people are acting out of fear, they are inclined for violence, and they inclined for this war against war. War of all against all, which is a terrible thing, but if you are moved by fear, you just lose your mind and fighting for survival. for survival of people as reasonable beings, we first of all need hope. We need public imagination. And what can inspire us is ideas of non-violent global governance. Governance not by force, but by understanding and by cooperation, by mutual benefit. It is ideas of achievement of social and environmental justice via development of culture of peace, instead of this military patriotic bringing and spreading of hatred, which now is widespread in popular culture. You know, I saw on Sky TV channel, British channel, an episode of meeting of Prime Minister Boris Johnson with kids. It is like for your information about war in Ukraine. And I posted on YouTube my video response to this, because Boris Johnson lied 3 times in this interview, and he even said that International Court of Justice already convicted Putin in war crimes, which is a lie and nonsense. And other statements of Boris Johnson is totally blaming Russia and totally refusing any misdoings of Ukraine and the West in this escalation, which of course is not true, because it is two-track conflict between the West and East, and expansion of NATO is misdoing of the West. But of course, the East also had very aggressive posture in this conflict. And this episode in the great battle between the West and East is the battle between Russia and Ukraine. And of course, in this battle, both sides, pro-Russian separatists and Ukrainian government, during 7 years didn't comply with Minsk agreements. Misdoings on both sides, but Boris Johnson said only Russia is responsible. So I posted on YouTube a video entitled "Don't Lie Like Boris Johnson," and you can easily find it and watch it. Now, what...
Yuri, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up.
Okay, wrapping up, I expect more anti-war demonstrations in Europe. I expect more investment in peace research and education programs. I expect critical analysis of international system, international law and international relations, and especially this notion of absolute sovereignty is the main cause, not some concrete political actors, but this notion of any political actor on his territory can do anything he wish. This notion of sovereignty should be criticized. And wrapping up, I refuse to share any fears, because in this time, all of us should have courage to keep the best hopes you ever had in life and continue to live according to your hopes and help others to live according to their best hopes. People do the best they can for common good when they follow their creative imagination. I expect that humankind will return to sanity, stop shameless killings and hatred, get rid of nuclear weapons, and realize plan of perpetual peace proposed by Immanuel Kant 2 centuries ago, which includes abolition of standing armies, establishment of cosmopolitan citizenship based on customs of hospitality, and creation of the world federal government. Non-violent global governance will change the world for the better, and once whole people of Earth will live on a better planet without armies and borders.
Thank you so much, Yuri. I can see lots of people clapping on screen. It's really, really fantastic to have you and your perspective. Our next speaker, we do have a Russian peace activist, but I think we were just sorting out the connection. So I'm going to move on to our next speaker, who is a writer and activist who writes and lectures on the global arms trade. He's a former member of the National Assembly in South Africa, a board member of Declassified, exec director of Corruption Watch UK, and he's going to be speaking to us today about militarization and the arms trade. Andrew Feinstein. Andrew, it's fantastic to have you. I'll just invite you to unmute. There we go, Andrew.
Thanks, Shelley. And thank you so much for the invitation to participate in this alongside such incredibly important speakers and thinkers. I've just come from a vigil outside Downing Street to the people of Yemen, remembering that today marks 7 years of that conflict, in which almost 400,000 people have died. So while we're focused in our attention on Ukraine, we shouldn't forget the other conflicts that are raging and that tragically are not eliciting anything like the sort of attention and response that we are seeing around Ukraine. What I want to try and do is paint another element, if I can put it like that, of the context in which the Ukraine conflict is taking place. And that is within the context of what C. Wright Mills described as the militarist mindset, a mindset in which we perceive the world through a military lens. And what this does is it suggests to us, as we have seen in the case of the United States, which of course is involved in more conflicts around the globe than any other country, either directly or indirectly, but it leads to this idea that conflict is the most obvious way to resolve disagreements. Conflict is the most obvious way to resolve differences. Now, while it's obvious to most of us with any common sense that this is seldom the case, it only makes sense when we consider the economics that are underpinning our rush to war and to conflict at almost every opportunity. And here I'm going to talk briefly about the economics of the global arms trade. So the first thing that this military mindset does is it enables our politicians to justify the gargantuan and, in my opinion, unjustifiable defense budgets that we have around the world. So the United States of America has recently passed a defense budget well in excess of $750 billion, which excludes monies put forward for actual engagement in current conflict. So if one includes that amount, we're talking an amount of probably around $1.3 trillion for the next year's US defense budget. Now, obviously, to justify budgets on these scales, one needs conflicts, to put it brutally and simplistically. And of course, wherever there is conflict, it gives rise to calls for greater rearmament, for greater spending on defense and on military equipment. Why is this such an imperative? Well, there are a number of what I would describe as contorted geopolitical reasons for that. But there's another reason that we often forget about. And that is that the global trade in weapons, which is the most corrupt of all trades on the planet, accounting for almost 40% of all corruption in global trade. This trade plays an absolutely crucial role in not only enriching individuals in what Lawrence Wilkerson describes as the global national security elite, about which I'll say more in a minute, but it also oils the wheels of our political processes. So in the country that produces around 40% of all the weaponry in the world, the United States of America, that takes place through a system of what I describe as legalized bribery, where the huge defense companies, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, etc., provide huge amounts of money to individual politicians and political parties to get them elected. And then in return for that money, the elected politicians return to these companies billions and billions of dollars worth of weapons projects, many of which are actually irrelevant to making the world safer for the majority of humanity. A case in point being the F-35 jet fighter, the most expensive weapons system ever put together. And to put it simply, in the words of the Defense Inspector General in the United States of America just under a year ago, it doesn't work. But we pour trillions of dollars into it because it continues to perpetuate the myth that this is the way that we make ourselves safer. Now, the way in which this money circulates in European countries and the United Kingdom is slightly different to the US, because in our countries, it's actually illegal. So this is where we find that arms deals, which are usually worth tens of billions of dollars, not that many of them happen every year, are an incredibly easy way to siphon money into political processes and to politically influential individuals. The sort of best case of all time is something called the Al-Yamamah deal between Saudi Arabia and Britain, in which then Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher's son was paid £12 million in bribes. That was literally pocket change. £6 billion of bribes were paid on that one deal alone, and it has never been properly investigated. It is the only report of the National Audit Office that has never been made public, even to members of parliament in the United Kingdom. And this secretive mechanism, because let's remember that everything that happens in the name of defense, in the name of an arms deal, is hidden behind a veil of national security imposed secrecy. So this is an incredibly efficient and effective way of effectively monetizing our politics, our individual politicians, our individual military and intelligence leaders. So there is another motivation for this constant drive to conflict. And that is the economic rewards that it brings to those involved. The most obvious recipient of these is Tony Blair, who after leaving office made tens of millions of pounds personally, directly and indirectly out of the invasion of Iraq. So when we look at the situation in the Ukraine today, the reality is that a few weeks before the invasion, the chief executive officer of Raytheon, one of the 5 biggest arms manufacturers on the planet, actually said to his shareholders that the instability in Eastern Europe, the further intensification of the conflict in Yemen, were all good news for shareholders and the company. It was as blatant as that. And unfortunately, all of the protagonists in the Ukraine conflict stand to benefit from the massive rearmament that the invasion has already given rise to, and from the continuing turning of the circle of avarice that characterizes the global national security elite. And it is only by arguing the inverse of what is happening, that pouring weapons into conflicts only makes those conflicts worse, rather than actually withdrawing weaponry from febrile regions like Eastern Europe and like the Middle East, that could actually contribute to the creation of a sustainable peace. And therefore, unless we address the rampant corruption, cronyism, and political financing that occurs as a consequence of war, as a consequence of conflict, we will continue to see conflicts like the tragedies that are unfolding on opposite sides of the world at the moment. And it is only when the out of control, corrupt global trade in weapons is brought under control, that we can think about making the world safer for all humanity. Thanks, Shelley.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for that really great contribution. Our final speaker in this session is somebody from the Russian Peacebuilding Initiative group. Unfortunately, we spent quite a while today trying to get her connected to the call, but the connection just isn't up to it, which is a really, really great shame. So unfortunately, we're not, she won't be able to speak to us, but we do have her comrade Lena, who I believe is based in Berlin, who has kindly offered to step in and to speak to her presentation, which is obviously fantastic. Lena, I'm going to share the presentation on screen. It's got some really nice images in it, and give you the opportunity to speak to it. So I've just asked you to unmute, so hopefully we can make this work. Lena, thank you.
Thank you so much, Shelley. This is so educating to be here with you, everything, and it's so touching what Oksana said, and it's so horrible what now Mr. Feinstein said. So thank you very much that you let me in. Icy is there. She's in Kazakhstan, and I'm connected with her via Signal. I will try now to that she can access even with her voice. Let's try if that works. Icy, can you say some words?
Yeah.
Okay, let's check. Shelley, can you hear her?
I can hear her loud and clear. So this is an amazing way around technology. Thank you both.
Okay, yeah, perfect. So maybe Icy, would you please tell us a little bit about you and about the article I shared here with the group?
First of all, I want to say that I'm just an ordinary activist from Russia, from the North Caucasus. And we started peacebuilding initiatives with the Ukrainian activists before starting the war, because we wanted to support these women from Ukraine and activists, and we organized online meetings with them. We shared with them by our feelings, how do we felt about this situation, and we expressed our support to them, because we know what war and these conflicts means and how it feels. And then when all this started, as you know, the laws in Russia, they became like tougher, and they didn't almost left any space for those who are against this like special operation. They didn't even left any space for expressing the protest. They built new laws according to which any help to Ukrainian people and is might supposed as treason, and for which you can get 15 years of prison, and you can. And people who tried to protest, there are still protests in Russia. They need to use creative ways of expressing their voice, and they were ironic situations. The policies they are so anxious that even people who are not trying to take part in protest, even they were detained. For example, they were an old man who was in wearing with two colors, blue and yellow, and he was detained also too, even if he wasn't the part of any protest. And such situations are still going on in Russia, and I'm so sorry that I can't now to present it to share my screen, but
I see,
in my article, yeah.
We see it already, and Shelley is now showing us. First of all, we've seen this money. What is the word?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
This is a kind of kind of protest. They put their words on it, and it's everywhere. Then in Russia, where trading is with cash money. So this was the idea.
Okay.
Now we see the.
We just don't have much time.
It's like a book inside a coffin or something?
Inside of?
A coffin, maybe? An art object placed in the urban space by members of the FAR.
Yeah,
a small coffin.
Yeah. I just wanted to add that law restrictions make Russians, and by talking about Russians, I don't mean only Russian people, because there are 190 nationalities in Russia, and it might be people from different regions, but we all are the citizens of Russia. I wanted to say that law restrictions made Russians who are against the war more creative. So this coffin, it's one of the protest things. It's an art object which was placed in Ulyanovsk. Like a small coffin is Putin's bloody, is like a symbol of bloody constitution. It's a symbol of all the crimes which are now going on. And the most prominent anti-war initiative is feminist anti-war resistance, which is just a space. It's horizontal initiatives, and by this, it made Russian authorities, which are now actively persecuting anyone who opposes the war, are taken by surprise by this initiative because it is horizontal. And authorities, as a rule, are always looking for leaders to eliminate. And this group is you can find it in Telegram, is a group, is a space for suggestions, ideas, and gathering information about protests. And they made posts about this protest. And since starting the war, they have now more than 25,000 of subscribers, and even more outside the group. And participants organize hundreds of protest actions, including pickets, marches, putting up posters, informational protests against government propaganda, silent pickets, installations, inscriptions on banknotes, and others. So you maybe saw this coffin. Then there is an action like Women in Black every Friday. Russian and even Belarus women, they wear black things, like for is a sign of mourning. It's a mourning action for people dying in the war. You can see all.
Yeah, we see it.
Also,
we see it. I see
photos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
Photos. There is another action which didn't get, I think, enough attention. Action with changing flag colors. As you know, Russian flag has 3 colors: white, blue, and red. And they were initiated an action like changing the flag without this red color, because red color, red stripe, is like a symbol of blood and imperialism.
So this, we can see now the last flag on the picture. This is an idea from the protest groups, have a new flag.
Yeah. And many women, they hold protests without joining groups. Among them is this 75-year-old artist from St. Petersburg who goes to all the protests, and she was detained. She's detained all the time.
Okay, we can see it now. Yeah, I can see it. Yeah, and we all can see it.
Yeah, you see it, right?
Yeah. We are nearly...
Yeah, there is another old woman who took part in protests against war in 2014. Do you see it?
Mm-hmm. 2014. Yeah. Where is it? Yes, the second picture, I think. No, the last picture. Yeah, of the older woman. Yeah. We see it now. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
she's with flowers.
Yeah.
And another woman, she's from Krasnoyarsk. She became like a symbol of this protest, young women. You can see the picture where there is an image like "future is female" is written there.
Mm-hmm. A little bit below, yeah. this one. Yeah.
Yeah. And all of you, of course, might know about Marina, who was an editor on the propaganda channel, the Channel 1, who worked on the channel for many years, but she broke the propaganda bubble with her action during the live broadcast, and during a news release, she burst into the studio with a poster, "No war, stop the war. Don't believe the propaganda, you're being lied to here, and Russians against war." And she recorded a video before her actions in which she said that what is happening now in Ukraine is a crime, and Russia is an aggressive country, and only one person, Vladimir Putin, is responsible for this crime. She also admitted that she's ashamed that she was engaged in propaganda, helping to zombify Russians, and called on all Russians to go to protest in order to stop this madness.
Okay, I see. How many time do we have, Shelley? Because I need to add something.
We have a few more minutes. It's okay. This is really valuable.
Okay. Let me just add that Russian women politicians also expressed their protest against the war. For example, Novosibirsk City Council Deputy Helga Pergova, she went to work wearing a red and embroidered shirt in the colors of Ukrainian flag. And that is how she expressed her attitude to the war of occupation. Colleagues of Pergova reacted violently to the action, and the deputy from the United Russia, Sergei Bondarenko, proposed to deprive the woman of the deputy mandate, reports some of the Russian newspaper. She's a member of Novosibirsk Political Association, and you can see her picture too.
It was a little bit more up, Shelley. This was the picture of her, I think. It must be.
Yeah,
it must be the second one.
I can say that even harsh penalties don't stop Russian women from protest. For example, there is a young woman, Irina Vakhrushkina, went out with the poster on which she wrote, "For this poster, I will receive a fine of 50,000 rubles. I'm standing here for your future and the future of Ukraine. People don't be indifferent. Right now, children in Ukraine are dying, and Russian mothers are losing their sons. It shouldn't be like that." And these women, of course, she was entertained.
Yeah, okay, now we see it. Yeah, we changed the picture now.
Yeah.
Okay, and I added just a picture here from the women of Belarus, because the Telegram channel of the feminist anti-war resistance group, which you can Google and you can join the group if you want, is more than 25,000 at the moment. And you need to Google FAS. Maybe we can write it here down in the chat. It's important. It's not FAR, it's FAS. And it's Feminist Anti-War Resistance. It has already a Wikipedia text. And there is the Telegram link. You can just join it. It's a great coordinated group, I would say, from the outside. I don't have access really to the inside because we just talking with the coordinators, but not so fluently. I would love to. Maybe our friend here, Mrs. Hudson, has more information. I don't know, but it would be great to support them more. Icy, do you want to add something? If not, I would tell just a quick thing about +7.
No, go on.
Okay. So Icy and we are working together. We are meeting in another anti-war, in another anti-war group, and then we meet each other there, and then we decided to do something against the isolation of the Russian society, the Russian community, because from Germany, it's like I was feeling like swimming against the tide, because everybody says now we need a barrier, we have the sanctions, and that means we cut all the connections from the cultural connections, the scientific connections in every case. So they really, the Russian people get demonized. Sorry, my English is not so perfect. They're put on the other side, and there's no contact possible. And then we thought about what can we do. There are already 2 initiatives. Maybe you've heard from this. This is Squad 303. This is a thing from America. They are trying to reach the people there with writing SMS. And there is another thing which is called callrussia.org. Maybe I can write it later in the chat here, everything with the thing with FAS2. And they are trying to reach the people with clarify the situation. They started it 3 weeks ago with Squad 303. It doesn't work so well, to be honest. But this was our research that SMS didn't reach the people. But there is another thing from the group Call Russia. That means Russian people should call the Society of Russia. Behind this initiatives is the thought: if we cut the contact to the Russian people, as Oksana said, if we don't involve them, we don't have a chance to stop the war quicker, because they are so important to help to stop that propaganda shit, because it's really awful. And I was in my research, when I'm going into the groups, into the Telegram groups, and trying to get support for our
Lena,
idea. Sorry,
I'm going to have to get you to wrap up, because we've got lots of people want to ask you questions as well.
Yes. Okay. So make it short. What we want to do is to really empower the people, or say them we need contact to the Russian people because of stopping the propaganda and helping the resistance group just with our emotional presence to say, you are great, go forward. So this is really, really important. If you are interested to join this idea, to join us, to support us, it would be lovely if you can write me an email. We build it up at the moment, so there's no website. I'm trying to do here at the weekend. If you would like to support, it would be great. Maybe Oksana, you will give us a sign. It would be fantastic. I will write something down here, or maybe you can send the papers in the group, the paper we made. Maybe you can put it in the group, Shelley, if it's possible, and then everybody can read it.
Yeah, if you're both happy for me to share the paper, I will post it in the group. Thank you so much. That was really amazing, and I'm so glad we were able to hear Essie's voice as well. I've got lots of people want to ask questions, so I'm going to go straight to it. We've got about 15 minutes. I wanted to ask Jerry to come in with her question, please.
Yeah.
There you go.
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you, Jerry.
Yeah, I'm trying to learn all this. I mean, I've been doing it, protesting for years and years, but I'm just a sort of humble grandma. But yeah, I find wars so abhorrent, and absolutely distressed. But and I was grasp at anything that looks a possibility for resolving this war. And I did see on Twitter that it said that Dmitry Peskov had said to Reuters on the 7th of March that troops could be withdrawn if Ukraine agreed to be neutral. I think actually Crimea was counted as Russian, and the Donbass was independent. And I thought, Russia's up for it, and sort of posted that all around Twitter. But a few people, I got back answers to say, good luck getting a Ukrainian majority for that, and it would mean the president would be assassinated. Don't ever underestimate patriotism. And I suppose, all the sort of the Azov and all that. I don't know whether, perhaps whether, getting the impression that Ukraine wanted, no, we're going to win this, which you see sometimes. And
if I get you to quickly wrap up, Jerry, your question.
Really quick. And then a couple of times recently, I've seen Yanis Varoufakis coming up with a similar thing, with the Donbass being like a Good Friday agreement on it, and so that's it's just it. It doesn't, the global thing with NATO, and and was saying that it would involve Putin and Biden meeting with Zelensky, and you know, it couldn't just come from Zelensky, it would need to come from Biden. But yeah, no, it's just sort of, yeah, what you think of it, really, if that makes any sense.
Thanks, Jerry. I'm going to take a few questions before we go back to our speakers, because there's lots of interest. I did have a question from John McGrath, if you're able to put that question, John. I've asked you to unmute. He seems to have now disappeared from the meeting. So there was another John M with a question. So I'll invite you to come in instead. Second, John M.
Hi, yes, so my question is how to mobilize a movement to demand on our Western leaders in the UK, etc., to demand for immediate ceasefire, if at all possible, and the full-scale diplomatic talks between all the parties, including obviously the big players, USA, UK, Ukraine, and Russia and China, etc., but also how to counter the rhetoric in public media that the only answer is promoting escalating arms imports into Ukraine and accusing any other narrative as being appeasement, how to overcome that rhetoric, and how to counter the rhetoric that continuing the war, sending more weapons is humanitarian, right and proper, as like First World War kind of rhetoric that we're all very familiar with in the war poets, but to offer, that is there to offer protection and is the only national duty. There's no national duty to, coming back to the first point, to mobilize a movement for an immediate ceasefire and to have diplomatic efforts. Obviously, the speaker on the arms trade, Mr. Feinstein, has quite given the reason why there is that reason why we're not allowed to have this narrative probably in the media. But how can we overcome the media's blockade on this? What are the rhetoric devices that might work to put this argument across better, to even hear it? I haven't heard it.
Thank you very much, John. Can I invite Tomasz to put his question?
Yeah, I just want to address some of the questions around arms, because I think often it's seen as quite a popular argument. You know, this is not a no-fly zone that's going to lead to a confrontation between two nuclear-armed powers, but you've got a group of people facing attack here, and therefore surely arms are a good way of supporting them without getting directly involved. And I think we have to come back to the question that, you know, NATO does not give arms to people without any strings attached. And NATO is not a neutral actor here, just sort of, you know, helping a poor benighted government. They have been an active participant in driving this conflict, you know, by pouring arms into Eastern Europe throughout the 2000s, and then since 2014, that's actually ramped up the what's been going on in Ukraine, and therefore supporting one camp which is also responsible is not going to be the solution. And I think we have to try and give a different sort of vision and point to the anti-war protesters within Russia and also Ukraine, which is why it was so important to hear from our comrades there, because that's what really has a potential to stop this horror, rather than arms or sanctions. It's anti-war protesters in Russia being able to inflict a blow on the government there, an anti-war movement here that is able to put the brakes on NATO expansion. But also in Ukraine, you do see people protesting on the streets against the Russian invasion, and in some cases actually managing to force out Russian troops from the centers of those towns. And by pouring more arms into Ukraine, that's going to actually lessen the possibility of that happening. And also it will just subordinate the Ukrainian government more and more to NATO, and making it more and more of a proxy towards to the West in that conflict. And therefore, I think we have to kind of put forward a different sort of solution and try and change the terms of the debate. I'm not saying that's easy, but by building up the anti-war movement, by trying to you know, make that point and show solidarity with people on the streets in Russia, I think we can begin to break through, because there is a sense about Western hypocrisy. You know, they are for resistance to a big imperial power in Ukraine, but not for the Palestinians. They are against bombing maternity hospitals unless it was the US
get you
that bombed
to wrap up,
maternity
please,
hospitals in 2003 in Baghdad. So I think we can tap in to that sense of hypocrisy that there's there.
Thanks, Tomasz. Can I call Anne?
Hi, and thank you. I must say it's been very, very interesting and great speakers. We all want the war stopped. There are great players there, East and West. In the East, they're subject to propaganda. We're also subject to propaganda, day in, day out, to escalate arms. Ireland is supposedly a neutral country, severe pressure on us to relinquish that and start upping our spend on military. My question is, I do feel that the Ukrainian people are pawns in this terrible war. I am really doubtful, and I'm not saying this to undermine the Ukrainian people, but how serious are their government? How serious can we take the Ukrainian government? Because they have landed their people in a terrible situation. I'm not a supporter of Henry Kissinger, but recently I read his statement. If Ukraine is to survive and thrive, it must not be either side's outpost against the other. It should function as a bridge between them. In other words, Ukrainian leaders must realize the situation they're in between two great competing imperialist powers. So I want the end of the victimization of the Ukrainian people. And I think we need to be much more critical in the West of the Ukrainian pronouncements, because in my mind, they are warmongering and hurtful to their own people.
Okay, Anne, thank you. We've got a lot of hands up and a lot of people messaging me as well for questions. And Tom, I'm conscious that you have spoken in the last session, so I'm gonna ask John first of all, if that's okay, and then Martin. Thank you.
Hello?
Hi, John.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah.
Oh, right, thanks. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, very interesting meeting, and the presentations, particularly those from Ukraine and Russia, very informative and of course very moving. It really brings home to you the horrors and what people are actually suffering and going through and so on. The last speaker, or the speaker before last, well, actually the last speaker, yes, she's talked about Ireland even becoming not being neutral. That really does worry me. I'm of Irish descent, so yes, that is something that I would really be concerned about. Any kind of build-up of military there. As far as the actual war itself goes, one of the speakers, a Russian speaker, said specifically that it was the Ukrainian president that actually didn't implement the Minsk agreements. Now, I'm wondering exactly, if it was due to him or to Ukraine not actually implementing them. Is that why? John, is that why Russia actually went the way they went? The other thing is, of course, is that this morning I see in a couple of the papers that Russia is now turning to the east. They've given up going to the west. Has actually got Russia withdrawals from the west. So I'm just wondering. I know that's just this morning. So I'm just wondering whether you may say something about that. Cheers. Thanks.
Thanks, John. Martin.
Thanks, Shelley, and thanks to all the speakers. It's been particularly interesting to hear from Russian and Ukrainian comrades today. But I do want to return us to the anti-war movement in Britain, if I may, and I suppose the left more broadly. I mean, we're used to seeing people move from the left to the right over a period of time, but it's been quite stark this time, the amount of people who appear to be thinking that bolstering institutions is the way forward, and specifically, of course, NATO. And it's interesting to me, without wishing to rerun debates around the EU, to the extent to which it's the same people who prioritise staying in the EU over getting a Corbyn Labour government, and now the same people who are essentially saying that the most important thing is that NATO continues as a defensive alliance. I think it's a politics of defeatism. And we're seeing this, you know, for example, I do believe some Labour Party CLPs, Redcar, I think it was, have actually passed motions calling for Stop the War to be prescribed. I want to respond to that by saying something about what we can do in Britain more practically. And that's, I think, to put motions through our trade unions. My own branch affiliated to Stop the War just last week. We had quite an argument over it. There were some people, indeed, the people from the Labour right, really, who were arguing the opposite. But we got it there. And I do think that's something very practical that we can do at the moment, is to think about the ways that we can actually get motions through our trade unions. Rob Ferguson said earlier on, quite rightly, the main enemy is at home. And so we have to here, if we're in Britain anyway, at least try and do what we can do here. And of course, that's getting out on the streets. It's putting on demos. It's putting on as many actions as we can. But there are also ways that we can actually change the narrative through things like our trade union branches. I mean, as I think Chris said at the beginning, I mean, Zelensky's comment about NATO has essentially put us in a position where events are changing the narrative, regardless of the insane level of chauvinism and insane level of propaganda that we've been seeing recently. Once we have a situation where the actual various real politic, if you like, figures on the ground are actually saying, well, actually, you know what, we can't join NATO, then it gives us a lot more space to make our arguments. So just a quick comment, really, as I say, people use your trade union branches and try and get motions passed. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that, Martin. Just before I bring the speakers back, there's a couple more questions that have come in the chat that I'll just read out. So Jenny asked, I suppose particularly to Yuri, we've seen news of Black students trying to flee Ukraine being prevented. Are there Ukrainian organisations helping them? And also I've seen pictures of people allegedly being sprayed with green paint and tied to lampposts. Is this really happening? And if so, who's perpetrating these acts? I've got a question from John McGrath who says, is there a way for activists to incorporate the cost of living crises and the increase in commodity prices, gas, oil, wheat, caused by Western sanctions into the anti-war argument? Great question. And also a question, particularly to Asiya and Yuri from Sasha, which is what is your view on Western governments supplying arms into Ukraine? So if I can perhaps start in the order that you spoke to us, starting with Yuri and with final closing comments and any thoughts on any of those questions, Yuri. Thank you so much.
Okay, talking about the situation with discrimination of students of African and Asian descent. Unfortunately, when I wrote this question, as well as the question of discrimination of pacifists in human rights defending mailing list Diversity UA, I was denounced as a spreader of disinformation, and even linked to video of African student saying that he was not allowed to leave Ukraine, that at the border they will give him a gun and he should fight for Ukraine. Even after this, Russian disinformation notion persisted, and I was excluded from this Diversity UA mailing list. So in Ukraine, human rights defenders for a long time turned into nation builders and then to warmongers. unfortunately, it is widespread tendency, and they are not criticizing conscription. They ignore violations of human rights of conscripts, such as arbitrary detentions, and now they are not criticizing this total ban on all males in age from 18 to 60 from leaving the country. And of course, as you understand, it is a great corruption around here, because some people proposing we will help you to cross border for the sum from 5,000 to 7,000 of dollars. So shameless people, they even registered a counter petition for a petition against this ban, raised around 60,000 of signatures, and a counter petition immediately arose to allow people who are, pay some of 100,000 of Ukrainian hryvnias from the military to allow such people to leave the country. Human rights defense outside the narrative of Russia violates all human rights and Ukraine is totally innocent and do the best to protect human rights, all outside this narrative is like taboo. So we indeed need only to develop peace culture, peace education, peace journalism, honest reporting about this escalatory attitude in Ukraine as well as in Russia and in the West. But also we of course need the development of more consistent human rights movement to revitalize old link between human rights defenders and peace movement, which was lost. And when I say to some leaders of our human rights movement why this link between human rights defenders and peace movement was lost and peace movement became like pariah and almost disappeared, they said, shame on you, it is a war and everybody should be defenders of Ukraine.
I have to ask you to wrap up, Yuri, sorry.
In this crusade. And second question about weapon supply. More weapons is more death and more destruction. Weapons is not humanitarian aid. Weapons are not aid at all, as well as sanctions. More weapons and more sanctions just discourage Ukraine from good faith peace negotiations, as well as encourage Russia to persist in aggression. Instead of military resolution of current conflict, we should think more and act more in support of not only peaceful resolution of conflict in Ukraine, but in favor of development of nonviolent global governance. Because without nonviolent global governance, without this world federation to unite East and West and to make peace and love the main powers, great powers which rule our world, without that this war can be permanent war, and a lot of bad things may happen if we will not develop peace culture and nonviolent global governance.
Thank you so much, Yuri. Again, a massive thank you to you for joining us today. Really, really important to have your perspective. I'd like to invite Andrew for closing remarks, please.
Thanks very much. Just to follow on from Yuri, the issue of providing more arms, I think all we need to do is look at the consequences of where our governments have provided more arms into conflicts in the past, and how that has intensified, worse, and often extended for much longer periods of time, those conflicts. So I think in this situation, to say that arms is the way to go is completely inappropriate. I also think what we are seeing from so-called Western countries is really symbolic transfers of arms to the Ukraine. They're not of an order or of a scale to actually make a significant difference. But I would argue very, very strongly that I have never seen a conflict in which the solution is to simply pour more arms into the conflict. All that does, as Yuri suggested, is lead to far greater suffering of all of those involved in the conflict. And I think we need to bear that in mind. With respect to John's question about how do we talk about these things? How do we counter the rhetoric in the media of the importance of arms sales, et cetera, et cetera? The first thing I'd like to suggest is we have something called Indefensible, 7 Myths That Sustain the Global Arms Trade, which you can read online at projectindefensible.org, which is really just a primer, if you will, of the key myths about the global arms trade. And so many of them come to pass in the conflict in Ukraine, or excuse me, and in other conflicts that we're currently engaged in. And I think simply putting across some of those very basic arguments to people who you talk to about these things can be incredibly useful. We are fortunate to have thriving alternative media at the moment. Shelley, you mentioned up front that I'm on the board of Declassified. Declassified UK is an online media site that if you haven't seen, please have a look at it. It provides amongst the best investigative work on Britain's role in defense, in the arms trade, in intelligence, in foreign policy generally. And I think is probably, in my opinion, the leading site on the UK in these sorts of areas that are so important at the moment. And besides obviously using social media, but using it with verifiable information and facts, the second thing, and I take this from a different time and a different situation, which is the struggle against apartheid in South Africa, where we would have a series of rolling house meetings where people would simply talk to a group of people within their own home. Then other people within that initial group would go and convene additional groups of people. And so this would cascade out, so that you have literally something that starts with a group of perhaps 10 or 12 people in somebody's home, cascading out to sometimes tens of thousands of people in particular areas. And this was obviously in a South Africa where the majority of people were cut off from most usual forms of communication. But I think that this remains a tool that can be incredibly useful at times like this. With respect to the points that Tomasz made, which I thought were very well made, just one thing I would like to add to that. When one talks about NATO, arms, are strings attached or not? Of course, strings are never attached, but we should take it back to even before then when we look at some of the causes of the current conflict. You know, the United States of America actually convened something called the Committee to Expand NATO. And you won't be shocked to hear that the person who chaired that committee to expand NATO was a senior vice president of Lockheed Martin, the biggest arms maker on the planet. And this person literally traveled around Eastern Europe with a very, very clear formula.
I have to ask you to wrap up, Andrew.
Sure. The United States of America will back your accession to NATO as long as you spend X billion dollars of weapons on Lockheed Martin weapons. And many countries actually did that. Finally, let me say, I omitted to say initially that we should not also forget that Vladimir Putin has made fortunes personally from weapons. It's not only the Tony Blairs of this world. Unfortunately, it's those on all sides of conflicts like this that we find ourselves in. But the final point that I want to make, I think it's a very good idea to link the cost of living crisis to the current situations in Ukraine, in Yemen, and elsewhere, because by spending the amounts of money we spend on weaponry, on defense, on the arms trade, there is a socio-economic opportunity cost, which is taking money out of our economies, taking money off our tables, as even Dwight D. Eisenhower said so many years ago. And we should never forget that. I've done quite a few pieces on Double Down News for that, around that, if you're interested in it. And then the final thing I want to say, based on a remark that somebody else made, given the situation at the moment, given our empathy for people involved on all sides of the conflicts, there has never been a more important time for Stop the War. So thank you so much for convening today's event.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Lena and Asiya, if you're still on the line, it would be great to get you back on some of those crucial questions as well. I'm hoping that we've still got both your voices.
I'm still here. I'm still here.
Great. Well, Lena, if we could get you to answer some of those questions and any final remarks, that would be fantastic.
Sorry, I wasn't in. Sorry, was this a direct question to me? I'm sorry, I was.
There were some questions, I think, more directly for Asiya, because there were questions about arms going to Ukraine. There was also a question about how people can be in touch with FAS, if you're able to fill people in on that, or any just final closing remarks.
Okay. This is really difficult because, as you know, it's totally dangerous to say something. Just even if you send a Facebook post, you can get 15 years for this. So they are really aware with whom they are talking. So the only access is via this bot from, if you join the Telegram group, you will find this bot. Shelley, did you already share this with the group?
No, I will post the name of
maybe
it
just a Telegram channel. And when you join the Telegram channel, you will see when you go up to the Telegram channel, there is a female, what is talking? Maybe you can share it. But I would suggest, it wouldn't be good if we are all writing them because they are overwhelmed by their work. And we are foreigners, we are not in. And I made the experience in the last days, there was a woman from another group, because there are many groups. It's not the only group. There is another female protest group with 25,000. It's called in English the Power of Women. There are other groups with having Kreml critics. They are Kreml critics. I don't know the word. They are against. They are on the opposite, and they are sharing all the informations about protests. There is Moskowach. There is Medusa. There are many channels. There are millions of abonnents. So they are in and they are sharing all the informations clear. So the problem of the towns is not they are not informed. From the outside, I would say there are many groups, and I don't know if they are talking with each other. I don't know it. I just don't know it. I hope it, and I would love to help. This is at the moment our situation, but they are really afraid of talking to strangers. So my experience, maybe it's good for you to know. I talked to another woman from another Telegram group, which is an opposite group of the opposite, from the critical side, a protest group, and we are talking via Zoom. And she's telling me she's studying in Cambridge. We have contact since a lot of days, and she's trying to use me as a propaganda robot. So I discovered it really a few days later that she was a total fake. We talked via Zoom. She was crying. Everything was so convincing, but she was a fake. So it is really hard to build up trustful contacts. So I understand them, that they say, we are busy. If you have a petition, share us. This is a thing I'm trying to find out now, if it's sensible to make a petition against sanctions. So on the other hand, I'm trying to yeah, to get more informations. But
thank you, Lena.
Yeah.
We do actually have Asira as well, who's able to speak. I didn't realize she's separately in the call.
Yeah, I wanted just to add that it's so ironic because sanctions, the sense of sanctions was like stopping this Russian government and maybe empower Russian people to protest against war, but it works in opposite way, because people who were really against this war, they because of these sanctions, they're deprived from their opportunities. For example, I am abroad, and because of sanctions, I can't use my card. And before this, I was an applicant for example, for tuning scholarship, and my direction was development management. I wanted to study in LSE, from which I got a conditional offer. I wanted to learn how to build democratic institutions, but now tuning sent us letters that they want provide interviews. I don't know why they didn't reject it, but something has changed. And for example, I was one of the sponsors of the Women for Women organization. This is an organization who is helping to women in different conflict countries. I was sponsoring them, but now because of my card blocks, I can't even to continue my my sponsorship. And these sanctions, they work ironically because they improve those people who were pro this government, because they improve this propaganda that West and Western people, they are against Russians. And as for those people who were against and they were possible and who had some energy to do something, they are just additionally oppressed by these sanctions. I'm not a politician. I just expressing the way. I just expressing what I see from the inside. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both of you. Really, it's been really good to have you on the line. I'm really glad that we could make that work in the end. I'm really grateful for your time and for your insight. And also, I'm really sorry to hear about the situation that you've been put in with the bank being cut off, your scholarship under review. And I really hope that gets sorted out. I want to thank everybody for joining us today, all of the speakers. It has been an enormous privilege to be able to hear from you, but also everybody who's tuned in. We had over 300 pretty much consistently throughout the day, up to 380 I think at the most, and we never would have been able to have that in if we held this meeting in person. So it's really good that we have that level of engagement. I'm sorry that we've run over again in this session, but I really think that we've had a really useful, worthwhile and informative discussion, and it's been great to have lots of people asking questions and giving their point of view as well. I finally just want to call on our convener, sort of war convener, Lindsey German, to just say a final word before we all head off for the rest of the day. Thank you, Lindsey.
Thanks very much, Shelley, and thanks to everybody who's contributed today. I think it's been a really useful thing that has helped us immensely in terms of our understanding of what's going on in Ukraine, and particularly thanks to the international contributors, particularly to Asya and to Lena and to Yuri and to Oksana earlier who spoke. I think it's been a real privilege to be able to hear some of the things that they've said. I just wanted to make a couple of very quick points just to summarize the day. And I think firstly, I'd just like to say that whatever we think is going to happen with this war, and we hope that it will end as quickly as possible, and we hope that the consequences will be as limited as possible. We know that actually, whatever the outcome, whether it ends quickly or whether it doesn't, it's going to mean not just misery for millions of people, but also a qualitative change in terms of the world situation. And we've already got a situation where NATO has been strengthened by the events going on in Ukraine following Russia's invasion. We know that there's a big increase in arms spending, which is going to be arms spending around the world. It isn't just going to be something which directly relates to Ukraine, but it's going to affect the economies of many, many countries, is going to affect the military size of the arms spending in many, many countries. We also know that there are going to be more and more imperial maneuvers, that we see this not just with, again, what is happening in Eastern Europe, but we've seen it more long term with the new Cold War in China, with the conflict which is growing in the Indo-Pacific, and again, which is continuing in the Middle East. And we know that far from the Middle East being something where the wars are a thing of the past, the wars are very, very much a thing of the present. So all of these questions, I think, are important for us. And for an anti-war movement, this is a very, very challenging period. And it is for us internationally. It is especially for the people in Ukraine and Russia, but it is for the rest of us around the world, because it's a time when we actually have to stand up to our own governments and not just fall behind our own governments in supporting whatever their policy is against Russia. We all condemn the invasion by Russia. We all want a ceasefire. We all want this war to end, but we cannot allow our own governments to be given a free pass for whatever it is that they want to do. And in the case of Boris Johnson, Priti Patel and Liz Truss, we have a good idea what their agenda is, which is scapegoat refugees, spend more and more on military spending. At the same time, they're spending less and less in real terms on relieving poverty, on things like education and health, which people need. These are all issues which are connected. And I think it's important for us as an anti-war movement that we have stood up to be counted, that we continue to stand up to be counted. There's a lot of people who, on the left, who seem to think that you can have an anti-war movement which isn't critical of NATO, or doesn't mention our government's foreign policy, or doesn't talk about all these difficult questions. Well, the truth is you can't have a pro-NATO anti-war movement, because NATO is at the heart of a system which is built on imperial rivalries, which is built on growing expansion of the military, and which is built on all of those sorts of things. So we can't accept that narrative. We cannot accept the narrative that nothing happened before late autumn 2021, that there weren't any wars before that. Actually, we've lived through now, since the end of the Cold War, we've lived through the first Gulf War, the war in former Yugoslavia, the war on terror with the terrible invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq, the bombing of Libya, the continued war in Syria and in Yemen. These are all things we cannot just divorce what is happening now from all those different kind of processes that have gone on. So it seems to me that we do need, from this meeting and from the other meetings that we're having lots of protests going on up and down the country. We're having lots of meetings going on up and down the country, and I've encouraged everybody to do these things. I would just say two things about those. One is that we have to be visible, that we have to discuss, and then we have to argue, and we have to be prepared to put this point of view in the face of government opposition, in the face of a kind of propaganda barrage where children are told to give money to the Ukraine refugees, quite rightly, but nobody says anything about the Yemen refugees or the Afghan refugees or any of the others. We have to reject that kind of analysis which doesn't put the context of what is going on in this war. So the first thing is that we have to be very visible, and we have to grow, and we have to have more and more protests, and we'll be announcing more and more events that are going on, and I hope people will support those. I hope people will join Stop the War and help us to build those. The second thing is, and my final point is this, that I think we have to link these issues, that in this country we're facing again a renewed pandemic of COVID, which the government is just simply ignoring and is pretending isn't happening. We have a situation where we have a war now that they're committed to more and more money for. Next month or the month after, they will go to Parliament and they will ask Parliament for a big increase in arms spending. We're already one of the biggest arms spenders in Europe and indeed in the world. They'll ask us to put more money for military, more money for arms, more money for all those sorts of things, at the same time that people are going to be starving and going very, very cold as a result of the energy crisis, as a result of the cost of living crisis, the cost of raw materials and food. And we shouldn't believe this is just a result of the war. This happened long before the war. So I think let's link up these issues as well. If we don't trust our government over domestic issues, and I think millions of us don't trust the government over domestic issues, why should we trust them over the international issues as well? So let's try to bring these things together, but above all, let's commit ourselves today to renewed effort to stop this war, to hold our own government to account, and to try to build a world which is based on peace and justice, where everybody can live equally. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lindsey. Thank you everybody for joining us today, and see you soon, comrades. Goodbye.